Welcome, Michael Rozon. How's it going?
Good.
How's production's been so far this year? What's been brewing?
It's been a little crazy. Work on the new ministry stuff, obviously. Working with Michael, doing a couple of singles, a couple of things he's releasing separately. There's a bunch of people I work with at Schecter on a regular basis out of that studio. A lot of noise music, people who have these boxes that generate noise. Um, that kind of stuff, the Jerry Cantrell stuff. Obviously, we've done a couple of dates. With that, I play like pedal steel guitar, lap steel guitar, acoustic guitar. Um, Now we're going to be going out at the end of February for 6 weeks again.
So with the Jerry Cantrell stuff, um, I know I'm not sure if you were in recording with those sessions, but did you work with Paul Fig when he was tracking?
We did,
Yeah,
but what the way we did it was they would just send me the tracks and I would do them at Schecter. But we did a session a while back with Paul at at his studio that's actually right near Schecter. It's on Lancashire.
yeah,
We were doing the national anthem and Jerry was singing it because the Seattle Seahawks, I guess, were maybe gonna get in the playoffs or something, and he was gonna sing the national anthem. So just Tyler and I and Jerry went and recorded that. And then the Seahawks lost or something, so it didn't happen in the end.
yeah.
So that was fun. We had a good time. It was kind of during COVID, so we all had masks on.
hmm
It was kind of heavy duty.
Yeah, Paul's studio is pretty sick. You're talking about Dave's room, right? Was that the
I
yeah?
think so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I went over there like before the pandemic just to check it out, and he invited me over there, and it's a lovely, lovely spot.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, so you said new ministry, and I definitely am aware of your production work from the American album, which
Mm-hmm.
I love the mix on that. So I wanted to tell you like
Thank you.
directly, fantastic job on that. It's just
Oh, thank you.
so powerful and huge. The drums have such impact, but also space and ambience at the same time. Like the snare is super punchy and thick, but it also like spreads out into the atmosphere of the mix.
Yeah.
So yeah, great work on that. Did you do um, the latest ministry record as well?
I did Moral Hygiene,
Yeah,
which was
yeah,
the last one.
yeah.
And actually, we got it done, and then it went to the mastering guy. And so they'd send me the files, and I'd listen and go like, okay, there's a bunch of problems. And like the mastering guy wouldn't listen to what I was saying. And Liz, who was Al's girlfriend at the time, she was kind of taking care of all this, and she was like, "Michael's not happy with the mastering. We need to address this." And it didn't get addressed. It got done. And then a couple of weeks later, she said, "Hey, do you want to come and record some more Alice to do some vocals for something?" I was like, "Liz, I quit. I quit because like you guys didn't listen to what I had to say about the mastering.
Hmm.
Like I have all those MP3s that I would send to myself and to Al each night, and they would sound fucking clear and good, and then the mastering destroyed it. I thought. And so I quit at that point. She's like, "I figured you were going to do that." And then at some point, Al was like, come over, we'll have a chat. And I love him. We have a great time together. And so we talked, and he said, okay. He says, I want to do another record. I want you to do it with me. You can choose the mastering guy. I'll give you this much more money. You can be the co producer. I hear what you're saying now about the mastering. He says, I don't even listen to the master. I listen to the MP3s you sent.
Wow.
I was like, okay. So now we're doing the new one. And I've been dealing with the mastering guy recently, to sort that out.
So what was it about the master that turned you off? Was it just too squashed and it just kind of lost the dynamics?
He was like the guy that's been doing the mastering has been working with him for 8 or 9 years. Like Al discovered him at this mastering place, and the guy was just starting, and so he got a nice bump by he's working with ministry now all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, and he's done some other big things. So the thing we sent him, the tracks we sent him, like one of the songs, let's say, would start off just with a snare hit, and you'd listen to that, and already that would be squashed.
Ooh,
Like
that's not good.
obviously like it's overcompressed. So
Right.
by the time you get to the chorus, when everything's going, it's distorted.
Yeah, and you notice too, like like when you say the very first transient of the master is squashed, and that's just the snare drum. By the time you get to the chorus, like uh, I've noticed too when mastering engineers they just limit it too much, and then the chorus like folds in on itself. It's like smaller than the verse or like the
Yeah.
intro. So is that kind of what happened?
I mean, it just seemed like kind of flat and like over. You know, I asked Elle, I said, like, what did you pay that guy to do the mastering? He was like 1,500. I'm like, okay, well, he just set the controls probably and just ran the whole thing.
Yeah,
He didn't treat each track. He didn't think about it. But $1,500, like, you know, what are you going to get? What do you expect?
right.
You
That was for
know,
the whole album.
that was for the whole album.
Okay.
It's like it's going to cost some money for somebody to master it correctly and make it sound great. You know, and it's not like we sent him shit. Like that mastering guy, I talked to him after we did well, what, right near the end of the American record, and he was like, "Okay, send stems of everything." And Al said what they used to do was the mastering guy used to kind of essentially remix the record
Stem
based
mastering.
on the
Yeah,
stems,
yeah.
you know. And so I'd send him mixes and stems, and eventually he was like, "The mixes sound great. We don't even need the stems anymore." So I was just send him the mixes all the time. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what his like. Personally, I wouldn't do that kind of work. Like if you know when I was doing Michael's stuff, the big stuff, the
Bic.
the big right big beauty cast. The first record we did, I started to master it, and I do a bunch of mastering for people. But I started to master it and thought like, okay, I'm not doing a good job here. This is not very good. This doesn't sound as good as it should. To get the volume, it's kind of distorted a little bit. It's not good. So I told Michael, I said, or I asked Michael, you know, can we get another mastering guy? Is there some money in the budget that we can pay someone who does this all the time, who has great gear, that's all they do? And he was like, yeah, sure. So we always have been mastering with this guy Dale Becker, Becker Mastering, because he can do a great job. You know, he does a great job. But you pay, it's like you know, it's like 3 grand, 3,500 for a record.
That's still fairly low for that
That's
kind of
still
work. Yeah,
that's not
for
bad.
pro like world class mastering, that's pretty low
It's not
still.
bad,
Yeah.
you know. But it takes a little bit of money, and you know, someone's heart has to be into it. Obviously, do a good job, and I think at the end of the day, whoever's doing the mastering needs to be talking with who mixed the record and did the engineering part, and like try to make them happy. Don't just wipe them off the slate and ignore what they have to say.
Yeah.
You need to communicate with that person, you know.
Yeah, I think my experience with some of the when I was first starting and I hired some of the more old school traditional mastering engineers, it was like that seemed to be the mentality. Um, you just send them the mix and you get back what you get, and that's it. There's no revisions. There's no even communication really. It's just okay. Send the manager the file. They'll do it when they get to it. Send the payment, and then whatever you get back, that's what you have to live with,
That's it.
unless you want to pay again to do it again. And I understand. I get that. At the same time, I think in this day and age, it it's a different mindset. I mean, every time I master for someone, I'll send different versions. I'll send like, okay, here's a hot version because most people want, and especially in metal, most people want things as loud as they can get
Yeah,
without it, compromising. And then I do a dynamic one, which is more pumping, like for vinyl. That's like has transient still, and it's like not too limited, just
yeah.
barely compressed. So I'll send different options, and I always communicate. Okay. First of all, send me a reference, something that you like, that you would like to be in the ballpark with, like a different record. And then I just there's communication. If I notice, okay, there's too much bass buildup in your mix, make a small adjustment, then I'll master it, and just at least some kind of communication with the
Yeah.
artist, so that everyone's happy, and then you can get the best result possible. So yeah. So so the same guy that did Americant, was he the guy you're talking about that?
He did that record, and when I got that back, I was like, okay, nothing got destroyed.
Yeah.
Like I thought, okay, maybe it's going to be amazing what he's going to do, and it was just like it was okay, but nothing got destroyed. At least I wasn't like bitching and whining about stuff. When we did the moral hygiene record, I was bitching and whining. It was really like, wow, that's really not good. Period. It's just not good. Like I wouldn't put my name on that. I wouldn't do that to someone and put my name on it. And like, even if they have no money, if I decided to do it and I was going to do it and there's no money involved, fine. It's still at the end of the day, it's going to be my work. So I'm going to try to do the best I can, at least.
Yeah.
And you know, when I work with, we both work with Sin. So I worked a bit on his three-headed snake stuff, and you know, when he talked to me about doing that, I mean, we had done a couple of tracks first, and he had the same guy master it, and it was okay. And then he wanted to do some more tracks, and I was like, I'd be glad to do them, but that guy's not touching the master. He's not getting near it. If you're good with that, we'll go ahead.
Yeah. I like that you know, you stand up for, what you believe in for the project. So even if you have to say, like, don't hire this guy, even though, like, because to me, ultimately, it's always up to the artist. But I like that, you know, you kind of set your standards up front. So
Yeah,
I admire that because I've been in situations where I wanted to do that, but at the same time, I want to be as accommodating as possible for the client, the
of
artist, because it's up to
course.
them ultimately who they want to say they hire you to mix. It's ultimately up to them who they want to master. You can make your recommendations, but um, I was gonna ask. So, how do you feel about like this more modern approach with a lot of producers and engineers? They will do like all in productions where they're, and I've done a lot of this too, where you mix and master your own production.
Hmm.
So, because I know that you mix and you master as well, like separately. But have you ever mixed and mastered your own stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I think at least for me, it comes down to someone's budget. Like sometimes there's some people I work with where there is no $3,500 for mastering, and they're not going to master it. So I'll do it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be better than no mastering at all. You know, in a case where someone has a little bit of a budget to work with, I'll go like, let's have put some different ears on it in a different room. Mastering guy's got a great two-channel chain. You know, let's do that.
Yeah, totally.
So it just depends, on the person.
Yeah. So when you're about to start a project, when you're discussing like artistic, like sonic palettes with the artist about, this is the direction we want for this album, what kind of approaches do you have with, say, like with Ministry, like guitar tone wise? Like, are you very strict about, are you like an all analog tube head person, or are you cool with using amp sims, or like what's your take on that?
I mean, ultimately, I love, a couple of amps if they're in good shape. If they're in good shape. There's a lot of amp sims today that actually will sound better than an amp that's not in good shape, you know? With the Ministry stuff, unfortunately, there's never like space to mic up an amp. So it's always like, okay, we're using the Kemper, or we're using whatever, the Marshall preamp thing, or we're using this, like something in the box. It has to be like that, unfortunately. It would be nice to have, it's like with Michael, with Bick, there's a couple of amps that we use 90% of the time. We'll use these amps. I mean, that situation is not such a high gain situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a little cleaner. So maybe that's different. But that's always like traditionally a nice way to go is to use some real amps. It sounds nice in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've been, I'm kind of a purist with guitar tones, so I've struggled to adapt to the amp sim world, but I have to say some of the stuff that's been coming out in the past few years has gotten really, really good. Like all the neural stuff. I've been using the neural Gojira plugin, which sounds fantastic. And a lot of the other ones they have sounds great. Like and also the neural dark glass
Hmm.
plugin sounds really good. And I always try to use tubed heads at all times when I can, but sometimes an artist will want to say, hey, let's try the neural, and I'm like, okay, and we give it a go. And what I really like about those is you can go in and you can you can voice the miking, like you can move the mics around in
Right.
the plugin, and like the 57 and the 421, you can switch them out, and you can, just by doing that, there's just such a variety of tone alone there. So I found like a sweet spot with that, and yeah, I've been just using that on a lot of productions in the past year. Just I'm like, it sounds
It's
almost there, and it just depends on the type of metal too, but
yeah,
it's getting really good. So now I'm just kind of, I have, my outlook is, well, whatever sounds good. I don't care if it's a plugin. So,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the amp thing takes a hell of a lot more work, because you got to mic it up, you got to have a couple amps, you get sound, you got to put it down. Once you put it down, I mean, unless you put a DI down, you can't, reamp it or anything. It's like, so you have to put the DI down with it. So you end up with, 5 or 6 tracks for one take.
Mm-hmm.
If you got a couple of mics on there, and so it ends up being a lot of tracks and a lot of time, and
Yeah.
the amps have to be in great shape. Otherwise, it's like it's better to go with an amp sim. It's
Yeah.
definitely faster. It's definitely easier.
Yep.
The thing I've noticed about them, and I remember even this with the pod years ago, right? They had the little pod. You plug into it and you play, and it's like, wow, that sounds really good. But then you get a couple of tracks of that going with the drums and the bass and everything, and you go like, what happened?
It
How come the guitar doesn't sound as
disappear.
good anymore?
Yeah. Like I remember the first pod, the little bean, the little red
Yes,
one.
the red one.
I didn't really like it. I liked when they came out with the rack version,
The
the
rack.
HD, and it got a little better. But I find with those, unless you have to take a lot of time to really fine tune it and tweak it, and there's so many parameters in those. But I found that for my taste, they seemed a little too scooped. So once you start to really layer them up, and then in the mix, I found they seemed a little too scooped. So I just had to adding a lot of mids to like bring the
To bring
articulation
it out.
out. And that's the one thing that I just love about when you mic up a nice head and the nice cab. It's just there. You don't have
It's
to,
there.
once you get the placement right and you get the tone just from tracking, those are my favorite productions and mixes, when you just let it be what it is. Maybe you add a little high end or you cut a
Yeah,
little lows out, but you're not having to like transform the sound of
the
it to get
sound,
it
right.
to sit in the mix and get it to feel right.
Yeah.
So that's always my ideal situation. But yeah, um, so how do you feel about if you get a mix for, you're in a mix for an artist and they send you, like you were just saying, say they have the DI, they have the close mic of the amp, maybe they have two tracks of the actual cab from like a 57 421 or whatever. So you got the DI, you got two mics from the cab, and maybe they'll sound like a room mic
Hmm.
of the cab. So you got like four tracks for one guitar, and then of course there's a double, so there's left and right. So that's already 8 tracks. But say they want to like quadruple it, so then you get 16 tracks, and that's just for left and right guitars.
Hmm.
Does that bother you? Like, would you rather just have a nice like committed tone? So instead of being sent 4 tracks, or say two, because it's always nice to have the DI, but does it does it does it bother you when you get like unnecessary tracks, and then like you're forced to like sift through and just figure out what will work, instead of just giving, they give you something that they've committed to, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I think in the end, it's like whatever sounds good. Like when someone does 2 takes, left and right take with guitar. The thing that makes it sound really good is the timing differences and the pitch differences. That's what makes it sound stereo-ish. When I first got Pro Tools early on, I was trying to line everything up and tighten everything up and make it dead on the money. And what I'd notice was if I did, then let's say the guitars, for example, would be a little more centered. They wouldn't be as wide all of a sudden. So you do that after a while and you learn like that, oh, it's the timing and the pitch that makes it that way. It's not, just tightening everything up and lining it all up. Um, so that said, sometime when I mix stuff for people and that they'll send like a bazillion guitar tracks, and they're not tight, and the sounds are not even good to start with. So it's better to like find, okay, here's two tracks that sound in the ballpark.
Mm-hmm.
We'll work on these and we'll try to make this good, as opposed to 10 guitar tracks that are just not, they don't sound good together. It just sounds like noise
Right.
at some point.
Yeah. I find myself when I get like I just got a session a week ago that was like almost 200 tracks just of crap, but like the guitars, the guitars in the mix are just left and right like metal guitars, but I was given like, and another thing that's really annoying is when they'll render it out maybe from Logic or something, but every single track is stereo, but they're mono.
Right.
So you have to sit there and go, oh shit, okay, now I gotta convert it to mono.
Yeah.
And then, but also I need to go through everyone to make sure that there is something isn't stereo, because like
Right,
when you,
right.
and I'm like, okay, so that's really frustrating. But yeah, I find myself just muting a lot of things
Yeah.
because if the artist seems to be indecisive about what tone to use, so they just give you all the tones.
They give you everything.
So yeah, I just found myself muting, and I'll make the decision and select, okay, this one sounds the best, like you said, so I'll use this for the left guitar, I'll use the other one for the right guitar, mute everything else.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself, do you like to reamp, and do you find yourself doing that a lot, or you just prefer to get the tone,
Well, if their thing isn't there to start with, like if they're not getting the sound and there is a DI, I'll reamp it for sure. Which could be an actual amp, or it could be a Kemper, or it could be something in the computer. And if I can get it to sound better, then we'll go with that. I'll print that, whatever, and we'll go with that. So I think that just depends.
Yeah. Yeah. And say in a situation where you do get a session like that, say you've given a session, but there's actually no guitar tone printed. They just send you DIs and like figure it out, or like, I
Right.
trust you, right?
Yeah.
But that happens a lot. It seems to be like becoming more of the standard, or what like metal artists expect in this day and age. Like most of the sessions I get, they just send DIs and they're like, we trust you, we've heard your stuff, just use whatever plugin you think. Like, okay, but then I do that, and then they, maybe I'll use a reference they've given me, and I'll try to get close to it. Then they're like, oh, well, actually, we wanted something more like this.
Right.
And it's just like, well, there are literally thousands of options here.
Right.
You gotta give me something, or you gotta like print something
Something.
so I know what you want, because there's literally,
Endless options.
endless options. So I get a little frustrated with that. And I like, ideally I would just love, a left and right printed guitar tone that they're into, and just use that.
You
but
can deal with that.
most of the time that's not the case.
I mean, it's an interesting thing that happens with artists. Like I find it more with seasoned artists, let's say, artists who've been doing it for a while. Let's say the drummer comes in and he's got like an 18-inch bass drum and like a small drum set, and you go like, okay, what kind of sound are we going for here? And he's like, John Bonham.
Yeah.
It's like, well, his bass drum was 26 inches to start with. He's fucking dead. Like, even if you had his exact drum set, you're not going to sound like him. But maybe your drums are going to sound amazing if we just go with what they can do.
Exactly.
With that sound. And it's just the same thing with guitars and a mix. There's endless options of chords and how to put a piece of music together and the speed of it. And it could potentially be something great if you go like, okay, well, these guitar sounds don't work with this, but let me pull these up. Oh, now these work. Here's a sound. Here's a good sound right now. Maybe that's not the sound the artist wants, but maybe it's a good sound for the track. Maybe that works really well. And, like seasoned artists, I believe, they'll kind of give in to that idea. They'll go like, oh, yeah, that's great. Let's go with what we've got that's good, as opposed to trying to make it something that it isn't, that it'll never be.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I can relate to that. Like, I've had a lot of situations where, if maybe bands that are just starting, or because I've started to work with, throughout my career, I've worked with a lot of like up and coming bands and indie artists and rock and metal. And, when you're first starting, like you said, like they want to sound like so and so, or their favorite band is so and so. They're like, so they come to you and they're like, well, we have this album ready and we really want it to sound like Korn or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, it's good to have that idea because there's many takeaways from that. But okay, first of all, you're not Korn. Okay, we can use 7-string guitars. We could try like the tone. We could try to go for those similar kind of tones and like concepts and whatnot. But I think, like you said, with seasons artists, they're just, whether they're famous or not, they just know, they accept who they are as a musician,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a tone and they just go with it. And like a perfect example is Sin. You know, he comes in and he just knows what he wants, and like this is his tone, this is his playing style. And he never goes, "Hey, can you make me sound like whoever?" He's just,
No.
he is who he is because
Yeah.
he's been doing it for so long. So yeah, that's it's challenging too, like you say, when a musician comes into the studio and they have so and so type somewhat kind of gear, and whatever that is the opposite of what they're asking for, like to for the production.
Right.
So yeah, that's always a struggle.
I mean, the other thing is like, the records that a lot of people are referencing, like that record may have cost $500,000.
Oh yeah,
They may have spent like 3 weeks, with like 50 great guitar amps, miking them up, getting the sound, making it work. And, here comes along someone with a Kemper and they go like, I want that sound. It's like, we'll probably get like 60% of that. That other 40% we're probably not going to get. That other 40% is going to cost another $15,000-$20,000,
yeah,
just in time, never mind gear. There's a big difference.
yeah, yeah. I wish more artists would kind of just realize that, especially like the up and comers, like there's no shortcuts, there's no cutting corners with production, especially, well, with all, with everything in music. But if you want your record to be great, like it just takes time, it takes experience, it takes investment. And a lot of up and coming artists, they, for whatever reason, they would rather spend more money on, going out and partying that month than on their record. And they won't, be like, what? I'm not, it's going to cost me that much? No way. I'm like, well, are you serious about your career and about investing in your music, or would you rather just go drink? You know what I mean?
Right.
So, um, yeah, I think like if artists could just, yeah, like I said, accept, that it takes time. It's an uphill journey. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So what kind of advice would you give for upcoming engineers and producers, like getting into the industry, who want to do this like long term for their career? What kind of things like do you wish you knew when you first started?
Well, I think I wish, like in retrospect, I think I wish I knew what a good sound was. It takes a while to figure that out. Like you have to hear, I think through comparison you hear. Like if you hear something in tune and you hear the same thing out of tune, you go like, oh, okay, this thing sounds better. It's the same with guitar amps, right? You hear two different amps and you go, oh, this one sounded great on its own, but actually this one sounds better. So I think two things. One, like understanding what a good sound is, which that it takes time. It's not like a magic bullet. Um, the other thing is, like, there's many artists that do, they've got 15 records that they've done. That's great. 15 records with 10 songs. You got 150 songs and no one gives a shit. And then you have some artists that have one song and people go nuts over it. And maybe that one song is really good and it's really well done and maybe they've spent some time doing it. And they will get more notice than someone that has this massive catalog of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to do something, try to do something good as best you can. And like I've read some stories about some of the great albums that we all love, where probably early on they could have gone, that's it, done, it's a great album. But they kept like nitpicking at things and going like, well, let's try a different guitar solo here. Let me redo the vocal and see what we get. And the thing starts climbing and climbing and getting better and better. as it goes along. But it takes some time. It's not just like, okay, that's it. That's the third take. Awesome.
Yeah.
Done. So doing something good is important. At least the best you can do at that time, because it's a relative term, obviously.
Yeah.
And like, I guess comparing so that you see the difference. Like even someone that doesn't have a lot of knowledge or ability, and you point out and you say, okay, this isn't really good, and then they're like, what are you talking about? It sounds good, and I'm like, well, listen to this, and then you play them something good, and they're like, oh yeah, I see the difference. I hear the difference.
Right.
So I think that's an important thing, just taking time and comparison things.
Totally. Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, I had a situation once with, this was the band's first record, and we did it all here. And after it was all signed off on, maybe a few weeks later, after the artist had time to really like digest it, because I'm sure you've been in situations where they'll be like, "Yeah, I love the mix, it's great," and then maybe a week later or a month later they'll come back after like freaking out over it, and then like extremely nitpicking things, and they'll go, "Actually, well, it doesn't sound like this record that I love, so we need
Right.
to go back and change it." I'm like, "Oh, okay, so you we signed off on this, and I'm moving on to other stuff, but yeah, we can go back and tweak it." But I had this one client that we were referencing a Judas Priest album, and he decided that he wanted to reference this after we had already finished it, and he's like, let's go in your car and let's compare these two. I'm like, okay. So we're listening to like a Judas Priest album and his album and the mixes we did. And he's like, well, listen to this album. Why doesn't my song sound like this?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, for a lot of reasons, you know what I mean? Tens of thousands of dollars, so many years of experience, like top tier musicians, and you record this in your rehearsal room, like with DIs and like crappy mics. And I mean, I think it came out pretty good for their first record and considering all the work we put into it. But I'm like, look, that's one thing that's frustrating, trying to explain that, because they feel like they're getting shortchanged or like taking advantage of sometimes. And it's like, well, look, that's not how it works. You're not gonna, your first record, especially like when you don't put every possible like amount of energy and effort you can do into it. If you're just gonna half-ass the recording, then why would you expect the master to come out like Judas Priest? You know what I
Right.
mean? It's so having to navigate those conversations is always a little challenging, but you know what I mean?
I mean, it's a balancing act,
Yeah.
because you do this. So like, okay, we got to make the person we're working with happy.
Right.
That's of prime importance for sure. Number two, you want to have something in the end that you're happy with, that you're proud of, to put your name on. And we're just not dealing with those kind of budgets. Like the things people are comparing things to often are like, that record probably cost $300,000, $400,000. You spent $5,000 on your record. It's like,
And still some artists are even think that's crazy, that
that's
amount of
right.
money.
That's
and
right.
that's for the whole record,
That's right. That's
so
right.
yeah.
So it's like, what do you expect? And I understand, a band like Judas Priest or whatever big band, there is a recording budget. There was a label behind it. They used to sell some CDs. They used to sell some vinyl. They sell some merch. They tour. They're making. There's good income coming in. A lot of people, it's like it's coming out of their pocket. Like
Right.
even if they have a record deal, the deal is like you deliver the thing. Maybe we'll master it. We'll pay for the mastering, but you pay for the recording.
Yeah.
So like those people don't have $300,000.
Oh, sure. That's why I always try to be understanding, because like I get it. Most of the artists I've worked with, it's coming out of their pocket. Like, because
Yeah.
even if they're on a label or a small label, like you said, they're not giving them like a $30,000 budget. Like maybe they'll master the record, like you said, but they're not getting the money they need to do it correctly. So they're having to save up, and I get it. Like they're hesitant to invest that much money because it's their own money, but it's, yeah. So it's very challenging.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, like I always feel like Either you do it or you don't do it. Like if you don't want to do it, you don't want to put the time and the money in, then don't do it. That's fine. If you want to do it, then show up 100%, put all your money into it, and you don't necessarily have to do 10 songs. If you can
Exactly.
do
Yeah.
one song that sounds amazing, that's truly amazing, people will pay attention and people will eventually start giving you some money to do some better, more work, you know?
Yeah. Um, yeah. I wish more artists would consider that because, like, I'm sure you've had situations where the artist insists on, like, we have to do the record. It has to be 10 songs. And, like, it's like, okay, well, maybe let's start with a single and then do a video as well, just to, like, have the full, the full campaign, and then build momentum off of that. But put 110% into just a single, and then, yeah, you could, have more of a budget to do it right, instead of, oh no, we have to do a record right now. It's like, well, you're not. There's no one is asking, like, there's no label here like insisting on the next record. So what do you mean you have to do a record? You know, so
It's a self-imposed limit, you know?
yeah,
Like I understand like with bigger artists, like, you know, the label needs some lead time. They need 3, 4 months lead time because they've got to do all of whatever, the press stuff and everything, and they've got to line up the tour and the dates and the whole thing. So with that, yeah, I understand that there's a limit to like, okay, this is as far as we can work, then it has to be done by then. But most people, that's not the case. Most people, those are self-imposed limitations they're putting on a situation. It's like get it to where it's as good as you think it could possibly be. You know, within reason. Obviously, we're not going to spend millions of dollars, but then go from there. Like,
yeah,
because no one's knocking down your door for the record to be done.
yeah, absolutely. So how was it? How was the process of the last Beauty and Chaos record? Because you did the full record, and also you did some remixes and you did the mastering for that. So how was that? How was that process to complete that?
Um, well, yeah, I think I've done a couple of remixes. So what we do is we get the record done. We send it to over to Dale Becker. He does the mastering. Um, while that's going on, usually, you know, once we're done, I'll do some stems, do a bunch of stems of the tracks. And then Michael and I will, mostly Michael, will send them out to a bunch of different people to do remixes. And once in a while, he'll go like, okay, I think I want you to, like, you really need to remix this, do a remix of this, you know. So I'll do it. Um, so that's kind of been the process. You know, recently he kind of changed over a little bit to the idea of like, well, let's do a song and release it. Let's do another song and release it. There doesn't have to be 10 songs done and the record complete because it's going to take a while, you know. Um, so that's kind of been how we're working. And he's really great with that. I mean, he does set limits, which sometimes it's like it pushes us up against the wall.
Mm-hmm.
But things get done that way. So I understand that. And he's always very accommodating with like, let's keep working on it and keep going at it and picking at it until you're happy. I don't want you to be unhappy by it, you know, by anything we release. So he's always great with that.
So do you work primarily out of the Schecter spot, or do you have a home studio as well, or?
Don't have a home studio. Like all Al's stuff we've done at different places he's lived, there's always a studio. Um, I work out of the Schecter studio. There's a couple of other studios I worked out of, but not nearly as much. Most people, I'll bring them over to the Schecter studio. They have a nice big warehouse there, so we can do some nice drums. Um, there's a room off the control room where all the guitar amps are. We've got some lines going in there. So we could mic up just, you know, there's some speaker lines and actually some guitar lines if it's a combo amp kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. So that's pretty good. You know, it's a pretty good situation. And that, like, they're fine if I go during the day and if I'm just in the studio just editing. I try not to, you know, bring any guitar players or singers in there when they're working. So that's not going on.
Yeah. So over there, are you mixing primarily in the box, or do you have like a hybrid setup, or how do you go about that?
That's pretty much in the box. There's a there's a record that I love. I like the songs on it, but I really love the sound of it. The band Muse, they did this record Drones
Hmm.
a little while back, and who's the guy that produced it? He produced the AC/DC stuff. Everything he produces is massive.
Yeah, well, I know Chris Lord-Alge did a lot of the Muse
No,
stuff,
no,
but
no.
no.
Rich Costy mixed it.
Oh,
Rich
okay.
Costy did the mixing, but the producer is Mutt Lang.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
so Costy said he would get these tracks, and he says there was so much automation. Like when he'd look at the different automation parameters on each track, it was just black because they'd be like, okay, every snare hit like 700 hertz, let's raise it and lower it, raise it and lower it. So he said it was just insane the amount of editing and automation was on there. But anyways, so Coasty, I guess, apparently he's used to mixing on an SSL, and he got this. Was it the Shadow Hills? Their box,
The compressor, the stereo
not the
box.
compressor. It's a summing box.
Oh,
The Phoenix, maybe the Phoenix.
okay.
Anyways, he said that he ended up mixing the record through that.
Nice.
He said that sounded as good, if not better, than the console. And that's number one. It's an incredibly loud record. The low end is gorgeous. It's clean. It's big. It's a beautiful. So I compare a lot of the work I do. I'll put that record on certain tracks and go like, okay, let's see how we're doing
Hmm.
compared to that. So he did that through that summing box, which was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. Like he didn't just do that on a bunch of outboard. I mean, he still had a lot of outboard gear and great inserts and stuff on the box, but still, he did it through the box.
Yeah.
So we've been talking. I've been talking with Michael about that, about the idea of like, okay, we should think about renting the box and trying it, or getting the box eventually. When I had the home studio, I had a DDA profile console. It was 56 inputs, flying faders. It was like a poor man's SSL, and like I paid like 25,000 for it. Originally, the console sold about 90,000, and at one point, Vintage King lent me a bunch of boxes so I could try them out, summing boxes. So he lent me the Dangerous music box, something else, and then the Neve 8816 or
Hmm.
something. And the Neve thing actually sounded really good. I was surprised. It was like, okay, wow, that sounds great. And they had a width control that was amazing. That didn't sound phasey or weird. It was just like, wow, that sounds good. So I think the summing box thing's kind of interesting. I haven't had a ton of opportunity to use them, but I think it's a good thing if they can get like the basically what's going on in the stereo bus of a great console. If they can put that in a box,
Yeah.
so at least you're running your stuff through that.
Hmm.
Probably a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. I went from all in the box to then I got a console, and then I got a summing mixer, and now I'm back like 90% in the box, but I do have outboard inserts and whatnot. But I found, because I had a dangerous summing mixer for a while, and that was cool because what's really nice about it is that you can push into it hard, and
Hmm.
you can shove your faders up in Pro Tools and push into it hard, and it saturates and it sounds really nice. Um, so I like that, but I've found now, a lot of the plugins have gotten so good in the box. It's like, tape emulation and console emulation plugins that you can get close to that. But yeah, there's something to say about having a nice summing mixer, like with a bunch of transformers, like the Shadow Hills and a lot of the Neve stuff. So
There was a band I used to work with years ago, and we were trying to do. They were kind of like Flaming Lips, kind of. We did this, Ill Lit, and we did this record, and there was one of the tracks that actually didn't even end up on the record, but we were trying to do some finger picking acoustic guitar that happened in the middle. Most of the track was a lot of big guitars and noisy, and but then it broke down. There's this finger picking, and I tried to do it at my house, and we do it at midnight, and it was still noisy. So I was like, let's just go to a studio. So we went to this other studio, and they had an Neve 8108 console. And for me to get the track to sound good at home, get the track up, low cut, compression, EQ. 20 minutes later, it's like, okay, track's sounding all right. So we brought it over to the studio and was just like, okay, just let's like run the channels through the board. Um, no EQ, no compression, no low cut, nothing. And it sounded way better, like way better. Like the bass was really controlled. It was really like big and open. The kick was controlled. Like everything sounded clear. And I used to read Mix magazine, coming up, and people would go like, "Yeah, I don't like using any compression on the bass drum or the bass." And I was just like, "Are you out of your mind? Like that shit's all over the place."
Yeah, yeah. Depends on the genre, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, that too. But those people were probably mixing, and the Neve 8108 isn't even like the most desirable Neve by any means. Um, but they sound good.
Oh yeah.
Like immediately, everything sounds better before you touch anything, even.
Yeah, just spreading out all your multi tracks across a console and letting it breathe and having all that headroom and the transformers and whatnot. And if it has a stereo bus, you know just making everything come to life. I mean, or a stereo bus compressor. Yeah, I mean, same. I've had the same experience. It doesn't like, and also I guess the speakers that are up in the room
Hmm.
plays a big part, obviously. But yeah, just spreading out the audio across an analog board is just always most, from my experience at least, it always expands the sonic palette of the mix. It
Oh
just
yeah,
opens it
yeah,
up
yeah.
instead of like shoving it through, a stereo output of
Stereo
an
bus.
interface, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was really interesting, kind of having that experience. That was like eye opening. And I asked the tech guy I used to use work on my gear. I was like, "Okay, what about the Neve 8108? Should I get one of those?" And he was like, "Yeah, you better get one of those like things that you go under the cars because I'll be living under there
Mm-hmm.
fixing it for you all the time."
Yeah. It's a
I was
lot of
like, "Oh,
maintenance. A lot of and yeah, maintenance, and it's expensive to keep those up. Like a lot of people that they have the SSLs still in their studios, and that they're super old, and you got to recap them and redo it. It's
yeah,
just it's
they're
a
old
lot.
now."
Yeah. Yeah. But they do have some really nice new. SSL has a new console called the Origin, which looks amazing. But they've come out with a lot of really nice new products, like 500 series stuff, and they have their own plugins now, which are awesome. But yeah, I mean, I love I love the idea of mixing on a console. I always have, but it's just about your situation and your workflow. So yeah.
And it's hard today because everyone has Pro Tools, so the artist, each person in the band has Pro Tools, so they're doing stuff at home and bringing it in, and like they expect it to all work like that. And it's just like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a company, Radar. So years ago, Radar lent me their system, and I tried that out, and I was like, okay, I'll have this band come in, we'll record a song, and with Radar, you can cut, copy, paste, reverse. I think that's it. You need a console to run it through. Still, it doesn't have a built, or at the point, it didn't have a built-in console. Um, and it sounded different. It sounded different than Pro Tools. And I used to rent like MyLab converters and all kind of stuff to see if there was like any major difference. And I had API pre's, Neve pre's, and it was like I was trying all these things, but that system sounded different.
It was a DAW radar.
It wasn't really a DAW. It was a digital recorder.
Oh, okay.
It could record audio, and you buy it based on how many channels you want. You can keep expanding it, but there was no built-in console.
Okay.
You still need a console to run through. So I talked to the guy who built the system, and I was like, "What's? It sounds different. Like it sounds better. Like this is the one digital thing I've heard that sounds better. What are you doing different?" And he's like, "We use all the same chips as everybody else's DigiDesign in the day." He said, "It's just like our analog circuitry on the input and output is much better." And they gave me a piece of paper at one point showing me the records that were done on it. Like all the Radiohead stuff, all their Beck stuff, all the Hugh Padgham was using it. Like the list of people that were using this thing was insane. And I was like, well, what about if people want to edit? Like, because it's not the greatest editing machine.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, what a lot of people do is they'll track into Radar, They'll come out digitally into Pro Tools, do all their editing, do their mixing, get the song where they want it. Then they'll come out digitally into Radar, put Radar and record without actually recording, and mix through that. So they're using it. They're bypassing the audio section of all the DigiDesign or Avid stuff. And that system sounded great.
Wow.
Sounded really nice. It was different.
So so yeah, ideally, would you, if you could, in a perfect world, would you still prefer to mix analog on a console? Or are you very satisfied with how in the box is sounding with plugins and all that?
Um, I love the editing in the box and the speed of at which you can do stuff. It's so much faster, and you can do so much more than you could do before. I mean, if you want to tune a vocal before, you'd have to run it through like an Eventide harmonizer. Like tune the whole thing up or the whole thing down. You can't tune separate notes.
Yeah.
So now you could take something that's not very good and you can turn it into something that sounds like, wow, that sounds amazing. If you put the time in. So that's beautiful. That part. I mean, the good thing about the Radar thing was when the band left the studio that day, they knew that like that was it. Like their sounds weren't going to get changed. It wasn't going to get edited to all hell and sound different. What was there was there, and everyone went home, and it wasn't like, okay, now I've got like 400 hours of editing to do. We were done.
Yeah.
There's something beautiful about that, and most of the records, that we love, a lot of them were done that way. We're like, let's do the best we can. It won't be perfect, but it'll be as best we can, and we'll go from there. Now we end up taking something that's mediocre sometime and turning into something that's way better. It may still not be great, but it may be a lot better than it was.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, before you wrap it up, are there anything you'd like to plug, or any big projects coming up in 2023 you'd like to talk about?
No,
No?
the new mystery record will come out. It's going to be called Hopium for the Masses, or the Masses. Um, we'll be doing the thing with Jerry. We'll be touring with him. I think he's going to write a new record after we do that. So I'll get to play on that probably.
Nice.
Um, Continue working with Michael. We've got another song that we had this guy Julian sing on. Actually, a really good song. So that'll come out, and we'll continue plowing through and doing stuff, as we always do.
So if anyone wants to get in touch with you and hire you, they can go straight to your website.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool.
Easy to track down.
Well, thanks for coming by and having the chat. I
My
appreciate it.
pleasure. Thank you
Nice
so
to
much,
meet you.
Alex.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.